the web has changed a lot since the early days, and there's a lot of information on the web that is quite outdated. So when I say modern web development, know that what I'm talking about are the things that have won the technology races and are, for better or worse, the de facto technologies. We will probably be doing some code today, but it's not going to be like my other videos. If you've seen my other videos, we're going to be pretending that you guys are starting at more or less ground zero. If you're not a brand new person, if you're not a ground zero beginner, I ask you, please stay on anyway, because you probably haven't heard your introduction to modern web development like this. Okay, I'm not going to bore you with dates and events that you don't need to worry about, but you do sort of need to have a concept of where we've been to know where we are going and where we are right now. So originally we had HTML and images essentially, and that was Mosaic. And it was really nice for research and researchers, and it was really nice for geeks. It wasn't much good for anybody else. And then CSS came into the picture. And now with HTML and images and CSS, we were able to start building things that sort of kind of resembled something that you would know of as a website. Everything was static in the sense that once you load the page, nothing is going to change. And then JavaScript happened. And JavaScript changed everything on its head. We went from completely static web pages to web pages where everything moved. Text danced across the screen. The background had stars that would fade in and out and sparkle and twinkle and spin. You had little cats running across the screens, rainbow text. It was a very colorful stage, but not very useful. And then we started to do server-side programming. And what happened here was that a thing called cgi-bin allowed us to do form posts to a remote server. And that remote server would do some processing that involved databases, involved other things, involved things where you're going to either be persisting data long-term, you're going to be retrieving data that was persisted previously, doing some calculations, think like insurance companies, then return that value. And then that value would just be a brand new page, and the whole page would change, the URL would change, and now you are at a new place, and you would have the data from the server side already in your HTML. So JavaScript didn't act like an intermediary there. It was a form post went to a different place. That place was a server-side thing. It did its processing and it returned you new HTML. Okay. Microsoft was looking for a place where it was looking for a way where it could have a Outlook web client, which is what Hotmail ended up becoming. And Hotmail needed a way to not just be static, but to, when you got new emails would pop in the box. That's where it all started. We should be able to load hotmail.com and in another tab start doing some work. And then when we look over, if there's a new message, we should see it without pressing refresh. So the technology that they came up with to do this is called Ajax. And it's essentially the basis of everything we do these days in modern web development. We just don't call it Ajax anymore because we're not using the Ajax specification. We're using the fetch specification, which is the tool and technology that won out in that battle. Now, something you should know that when I say battle, we're talking about groups of people who make these decisions by committee. They're called standardization organizations or standardization committees, and software and computers, hardware is full of them, because if it wasn't, you wouldn't be able to plug, a part for a computer made in England into a computer. That's how it originally was. And then these specs started coming out, and then organization gathered around them. So you have things like the ecmascript organization. They're actually the people that decide what goes into JavaScript and what doesn't go into JavaScript. And most of them are not actually JavaScript people. Most of them are Microsoft, because that was the price of basically killing JScript, was that Microsoft would have a seat at the table for JavaScript. Because at one time, pretty much the time that I've gotten up to in this timeline, you had to write JavaScript for Netscape, and you had to write JScript or VB script for Internet Explorer. So all your client-side code was being written twice, at least. And there was other smaller browsers on the market, and sometimes you would support them and sometimes you wouldn't, usually not. And so that's how Microsoft got a seat at the Java table. Sun Microsystems has a seat, or at the JavaScript table. Sun Microsystems has a seat at the JavaScript table because they own the copyright, or they own the trademark to the word JavaScript. So JavaScript is actually ecmascript. Ecmascript, let me crack open a Volt here. Honestly, it tastes pretty terrible after our coffee. ECMAScript is the standard JavaScript. So this committee decides what goes into JavaScript, what doesn't. So what happens is that we can now load a web page, and JavaScript will be sort of doing like a polling or a timer, where it's going to send a server-side request, but it's going to do it inside of JavaScript. So the front-end user, the person who's looking at a web page, like we're looking at this web page, which, by the way, is the homepage for webdevcourses.tv. So if you're wondering what the schedule is, if you're wondering where to find us, if you want to know how to find out any other information, you can just go to webdevcourses.tv. and you'll see this. And I knocked this out, in about an hour, using the types of technologies that I'm teaching in this exact class, this exact course. So by the end of this, say, 2-week period, if you have attended every day, or at least 4 days out of the 5 each week for Introduction to Modern Web Development, you should be at a place by the end of it where you can create this HTML and CSS. Maybe not fluently or easy, but you will have the tools to be able to do it. So you're looking at this web page. You will not see the HTTP request that happens in the background from the JavaScript. But if you open up your console by right-clicking, clicking Inspect, this is in Firefox, but the same works for Edge, the same works for Chrome. The windows will be a little bit different, but in general, it's the same. When you go to the Network tab, if there is a Ajax or fetch request, an asynchronous request from the JavaScript side of this application, you will not see it up here. You will only see it down here in your Network tab. That's the beauty of Ajax, or in our case, the beauty of fetch, because we're working with modern specs. So a fetch will happen, hit the server, come back with new data, not new HTML, new data, and then that would get rendered into this page. So in our journey, we were somewhere back in about 1999-ish. Nothing with images. We need something with images. How about the internet of 1999 images? Okay, yeah, this was the internet of 1999. This is what it looked like. Those were the days. So this is what the web looked like. We had Ajax, we had all that stuff, but our HTML was still just HTML, and the JavaScript was in the HTML. And there was no way to really program HTML in the sense that you could be like, well, This block of HTML shows up if this variable is true, or the other block of HTML will show up. Couldn't really do that. So what happened is that cgi-bin thing that I was talking about, cgi-bin request response process, it just looked like this. You would send a request off to the server. The server would send a CGI call off to either another server or a CGI program on the same server. And then the response would come back, and then the HTTP response would come back, but there would also be HTML that would come back, and then the HTML would just display in the browser. We moved to something called templates. Templates, this is probably not going to show me what I want. Like ERB, liquid, other things. It's not going to show me the right images. We moved to the templates in the sense that when the web server was going to send the data back to the client, instead of just sending back the same static HTML with some small changes, you could now write a server-side language like PHP, so that you could say, well, if variable A is true, return this HTML block. Otherwise, if variable is B, return this HTML block. And you could have a whole bunch of those logic checks in the server-side template. And then now you could program HTML. So the HTML would go down to the client, and you would have the HTML that you were expecting. Then we went to the Ajax model. And let's see if we can find a decent one here. Okay. So I'll make that a little bit bigger. Ajax changed things like this. You're in your browser, and now in the behind the scenes in that network tab that I showed you, a request is made. So it's exactly the same as before, except now it's happening behind the scenes. The whole page isn't loading while we're waiting for the server to respond, do its work, and then also resend the HTML down to us. We already have the HTML. We're just sitting there, and we hit a button, and behind the scenes now, that request goes out. So the request goes to the server responds back with not the HTML, but the actual data that will be needed. So usually on the server side, the data and the code would bind together and then create the HTML, and the HTML would come back. That's not how we do it today. The HTML is built on the client, so we just send the data back. So that could be XML. Most commonly these days is JSON, but it could be RPC calls, a whole bunch of other things. For the all intents and purposes in modern web development, it's JSON. Okay, so now your JSON has come back to your browser, and the JavaScript in your browser will look at that JSON and then do some logic like what we used to have to do with on the server in PHP with templates. We can now do in the client using, just JavaScript. And like I said, there's no page reload. They don't notice that the user doesn't notice that they're going anywhere, and the user doesn't really see the data come back. What they see is the page just starts changing in front of their eyes, which is the modern web. So we've basically caught up to the modern web. Ajax gave us birth to things like Batman, Knockout. We had Ember, Backbone. We had a whole bunch of libraries competing for a space. And then a funny little guy came along called Fax.js and sort of changed everything, but Fax.js really didn't get a lot of traction. It was eyed by Facebook as a possible solution for their very complicated web-based ad tool. And so they picked up Jordan Walke, and they picked up Fax.js. Jordan's the guy that created Fax. And they rebranded it React. And Jordan was essentially, if not head of the engineering team, he was the figurehead of it, and sort of like the philosopher of the, when you're talking about the philosophy of the actual software of React, he was sort of the architect of the philosophy. Okay, so that really does bring us up to date. We had a whole bunch of server-side stuff. We had MVC, we had Ruby on Rails, we had Django. There's still a lot of that stuff around, and you can make a lot of money learning older languages and older technologies, which really in tech just means like 5 or 10 years old, that other people don't want to do because it's not trendy. And you can make a lot of money that way, where you just learn the older technologies and you just take all of the maintenance jobs that everybody else is too cool for. Okay, so we've caught ourselves up. We've done model view controller and all of that stuff. And then we finally get to the modern stuff, which is ReactJS. Where is my, apparently I went away from it. Let's not go away from my website. Let's leave that there. All right, so we can look at the network tab and we can see things happen. There is no network. There's nothing that's going to happen on this one because this is just a static web page that I built using HTML, CSS, and I use Tailwind for it, which is a library that helps us do stuff. So let's talk about the technologies of modern web development. Now that we've gotten rid of all of like the history lesson. The history lesson is sort of important because unless you know where we've been, it's sort of hard to understand why we're here or what here means. Keep yourself hydrated. So we've had lots of versions of HTML over the years, and we've had, there were a lot of battles to get to HTML5. HTML5 added, it standardized between some mistakes that were happening between different browsers. It also added a whole bunch of accessibility, video, audio, a whole bunch of cool stuff. It made HTML more programmatic than it was before, for sure. You have CSS, which stands for cascading style sheets. CSS is essentially the clothing that you put on the web page. So if you walked out of the house without any clothing on, you would be naked and probably arrested, depending on where you live. You could think of CSS as the clothes. You put your CSS on and now your HTML is no longer naked. It does make it, you're able to change the font, change the color, change all kinds, thousands and thousands of different properties. However, HTML, just HTML, will work on a desktop, it'll work on a laptop, it'll work on a tablet, it'll work on a phone. The text will be readable on all platforms. It's what we call responsive, where things won't like go off the page where you can't see them. Everything will fit. There'll be a little bit of white space between things like what you're seeing right now here with this text. These are what CSS provides. So when you take away CSS, you just see like, think of like newspaper text, and it'll expand and it'll shrink depending on how big your device is or how big you drag the window. But as soon as you put CSS into that, essentially you can override all of that responsiveness that's built into HTML5. And now you have to implement your own responsiveness to say things like, okay, when you're looking at it on a mobile phone, the text is this size. When you're looking at it on a desktop, the text is a different size. So this is the concept of responsiveness, so that no matter which device you're looking at, the web page still looks good. To do this, and to do this easily, we ended up with tools like Bootstrap. Now, Bootstrap is still in use today. It's been superseded by modern technology, but it is still around. It's another one of those things where if you learn it and you learn it well, there'll be a lot of work for you in the future maintaining stuff that you didn't build, which in some cases is easier because you don't have to build all the stuff from scratch. It's already there. You just have to add some things, tweak it here and there, fix problems. So Bootstrap gave us a framework, which is essentially, or a library, you might be heard it called, which is essentially a whole bunch of pre-built code. And that pre-built code will allow you to do things quickly, like throw a border on something, make two elements side by side, create a list where each of the bullets is an emoji. Bootstrap gives you the ability to do that stuff, but also have a viewport that can be changed so that, again, the text is one size on one platform, mobile, and it's on a different size on, say, a desktop, and a different size again on a tablet. Now we've gone to stuff like TailwindCSS, which is the clear winner right now. And it's because of something called utility first design. And I encourage you to learn TailwindCSS right from the beginning. Instead of just going straight to CSS, learn yourself TailwindCSS, and then use TailwindCSS to understand and learn CSS. Because the TailwindCSS code is essentially cross-browser, which means that the CSS that they have picked out to use for these utility classes, the code that they picked out to use these utility classes, will show up across all browsers and all devices fairly consistently. Bootstrap doesn't do that. CSS certainly doesn't do that. And then when you're learning your CSS from TailwindCSS, what you're essentially doing is learning just the good parts of CSS. So imagine CSS this is 100%. Tailwind will teach you about this much of CSS, but it's the stuff that works, and it's the stuff that works everywhere, so that you don't have to worry about this feature that we built doesn't work for Safari, which is a real thing in development. You build something that works great on Edge, it works great on Chrome, it works great, and then it doesn't work on Firefox, or it works on Firefox, but it doesn't work on Edge, or things just look differently. Tailwind aims to solve that. So Tailwind is sort of like having a tailor bespoke you some clothes rather than getting them off the rack, which would be like Bootstrap, or sewn completely from scratch by untalented and unskilled workers. That would be CSS. Okay, then we start to get to the good stuff. JavaScript. JavaScript is what makes the web interesting. Without JavaScript, it's a very good place to share information like blog posts, articles, documents, things that think of a book. It's very good to show information like a book does. But as soon as you want it to do more than what a book does, as soon as you want it to be a visual experience, an auditory experience, as soon as you want things to move around on the page, you need JavaScript. Now, you're going to hear JavaScript and you're going to hear TypeScript, and they're going to be interchangeable for the most part, because they do the same job. And actually, TypeScript is just JavaScript, and it just has a couple. TypeScript is a DSL. It's a domain-specific language. It's not really a language. It's sort of like syntax built on top of a pre-existing language. So TypeScript helps organizations and groups code together in a way that's less prone to bugs. There's some other benefits, there's other drawbacks, but in general, TypeScript compiles down to JavaScript, and then JavaScript is actually what you find in your browser. So JavaScript, TypeScript, just think of them as interchangeable, at least in your early career. At some point, you'll be able to differentiate between the two, and you'll know when to use one or the other. And also libraries like ReactJS. So in the way that Ajax made the web sort of come to life with server-side requests that happen in the background, ReactJS did the same thing for the front end, for like the stuff that's on your machine, in your browser, and it's running. JavaScript plus ReactJS now means that when that JSON comes in from the server, the whole page just reacts. Sections change, new information is shown. The possibilities are endless. With ReactJS, you can rebuild all of the basic stuff that comes with HTML and CSS. You can rebuild all of it in ReactJS and then improve on it. So say like the input field, checkboxes, radio buttons, drop downs, all of these things that are in HTML are kind of terrible because they have backward compatibility and they're very old. Whereas React.js, whatever you build, doesn't have to have backward compatibility because you're creating it from scratch. Nobody's ever used this thing before. And you can do pretty amazing things. Then we get up to web app frameworks. In the past, almost all of the frameworks were server-side. You had things like Django, Ruby on Rails. There was Python versions of PHP versions of the same thing. There were tons and tons and tons of model view controller architecture frameworks. Those have mostly gone out of style, and we tend to do things with modern web app frameworks like NextJS or Remix. What is the difference between, say, Ruby on Rails and NextJS? Well, they both run on a server, but the main difference is the Ruby on Rails one, you're tied to a type of SQL. We'll be teaching SQL later. When is the SQL session? The SQL session is 7 p.m. Mexico time, Central Chicago, Dallas, Texas, that kind of thing. I'll be actually going into what is SQL, etc. So you have a Postgres SQL server or a MySQL server if you're doing Ruby on Rails, and you generally have a document-based server like Mongo if you're doing things like NextJS or Remix. The difference between the two is not really so much important here. It takes a lot more code to connect to and to work with a SQL server than it does with a document server, because JavaScript already understands the JSON that's in the second type of database, the document-based database. So Next.js gives you the ability to like accept requests and send back responses just like we did in the old days. The difference is now there's this communication between the client and the server that users aren't really aware of until like new information starts popping up on the screen. So you can build really, really, really reactive applications, games, all kinds of stuff with Next.js, Remix, React that you couldn't build before. You could build it maybe, but it would take a lot of work and a lot of expertise. So Next.js gives you access to something called Serverless, which is different from like what you would do with the Ruby on Rails or the Django stuff. Those would be put on a virtual private server. You'd have to set up the Linux box. You'd have to set everything up. You could push it to some kind of a provider like Heroku, which would essentially deploy a VPS for you and then set up your app. These days we work with something called Serverless, where there's not actually just one server that listens for your requests. You get essentially free servers all over the world that mirror the one that you buy. And then those ones can serve the requests closer to their areas, so that if you're in China, you're getting web requests directly to China faster. If you're in India, the web requests are much faster because you're getting a server that's close to you. But even better, it means that like you don't have to install Linux, you don't have to set up security, you don't have to install a database. All of that stuff in Serverless melts away into a role called DevOps that we'll talk about later. And it's all hosted at a company, so you don't have to deal with any of that stuff before. Back in the early days, if you wanted a website, you literally built a computer, put the website on it, put the computer on your internet in your house, got a static IP from your internet provider so that your address didn't change, and you would host your website. And if you got any amount of traffic at all, your website would crash and you'd have to get more machines and more machines. Eventually those machines moved to locations that you would just pay a company for. Then you were able to share one of those machines so they could build a super powerful machine and put 1,000 people on it. We would each use a little bit of the resources, but not all of it. So as soon as you get to like Next or Remix, you have to start thinking about the server. Even if you're running serverless, you have to think about code that's going to be hitting databases. We call this full stack. So when you're dealing with Remix, you're dealing with Next.js, you're probably doing full stack development. When you're just doing HTML, CSS, maybe some Tailwind, even ReactJS and JavaScript, that's not full stack development. You're still just a front end developer. You don't become a full stack developer until the back end or the server comes into focus. And then you're dealing with databases. You're dealing with remote API calls, RPC calls. You're dealing with things that are happening on the server, and that just doesn't occur to you until you get up to something like Next.js or Remix. On the serverless side for those Next.js and Remix apps, generally it's just JavaScript and TypeScript, which is very nice, the sense that like the code that runs your website, the code that just gets stuff, all the data from the database, but it's just for your website. The code that runs API calls and does security stuff, but again, just for your website. All of that is usually written in JavaScript or TypeScript because it's really just an extension of your web application. Then you actually need like real server-side languages. Imagine if you had 10,000 records of data that had something where you had like look up stuff in some kind of a table, like actuary tables or I don't know, municipal codes. Like there's some large data set that you're going to have to run some code that's going to match your data set to the larger data set, and it's going to do some stuff. Imagine people in a back office and they're pulling files out and they're moving files around and they're updating files and they're putting the files away and they're putting the box back on the shelf. Really, that's all computers are doing for us these days. Just the files and the boxes and the rooms are digital. When you find that you need that sort of processing, JavaScript, client side, even serverless, even TypeScript, it's really not a good fit. You need something that has a little bit more power and runs, if not natively, sort of natively on that server environment. And now you're looking at things like PHP, which, like I said before, not really part of modern web development, but very much still a required thing if you're going to be a full stack developer. C#, if you're going to go the Microsoft route, would replace your PHP. Go, if you're going to go with the Google route, would replace your C#. And Java, if you're into that sort of thing, or you're from a part of the world where every job is Java on the back end, then that would replace your Go. So PHP, C#, Go, and Java are essentially the same thing. They do the same job. They're just drastically different in syntax. Then you have, I'll call them DevOps roles, where you're doing things like, you understand how serverless works. You know how to configure Netlify and Vercel servers, setting up env variables, which allow one machine to have different values from another machine. You're setting up domain names. You're doing DNS. Then you got DevOps, which means like you're actually working on the servers. Your world is what other people call serverless, but for you, it's just nothing but the server. That's why it's serverless to them, because it's 100% all the time server to you. Okay, those people are called DevOps. So what they do is they work with something called Linux, which is a server, a backend server system, basically. We have Echo. Well, I don't know what to tell you. We were doing this last night. We should have fixed it last night. All right, so DevOps, Linux. Oh, piping is an advanced concept of things that you would know, like if you're a backend programmer or if you do DevOps. It's a concept of streams that are flowing in and then redirected and flowing out. Piping in Unix, Linux, serverless, Go, to a lesser extent Java, very, very important. And then finally you get to build tools for like modern web development, right? Because that's what we're talking about. So the build tools like Webpack, Gulp, TurboPack, which will eventually replace Webpack, Gulp, which is like it's a way of stringing a bunch of different tasks together using JavaScript basically to do build processes. So like if I'm working on a site and it's got HTML, it's got CSS, it's got images, it's got JavaScript, and I need to run a script that's going to do a bunch of stuff so that the code is ready for the server. That's something where Webpack would come in, or Gulp, or TurboPack, or whatever it is. You would have some sort of a package manager that would do some programmatic work on the site before the site's ready to be uploaded. That pretty much takes us to where we are at now, which is, I guess, question and answer time. Tomorrow we are going to be also doing Introduction to Modern Web Development, but tomorrow we're going to be starting with the actual HTML5, some CSS, and maybe a little bit of JavaScript, but probably just a little bit of HTML and CSS first. We're going to go through the HTML elements that I think are important because of their semantic quality and value and usage, and some trends and some other stuff. We're going to go through HTML, the good parts, essentially. And we might just touch a little bit on CSS, but it's not going to be a huge part of tomorrow. Maybe on Wednesday, there'll be a little bit more. At 10 a.m., we're going to be doing JavaScript for beginners. Again, all of these are Monday through Friday. In fact, let me just switch over to my schedule so that everybody can see exactly what's going on. So this is what we're looking at. And essentially what we have here is there's 6 classes every single day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. 9 a.m. Introduction to Modern Web Development. 10 a.m. Vanilla JavaScript for beginners. 11 a.m. is writing clean code using Solid. This is a little bit more advanced, but it's not senior level stuff. You can learn this as an advanced junior or as someone that's a mid-level developer. Designing UX using Tailwind CSS is at 12 p.m. It's the last of the morning sessions. It's very important for all developers, even if they're not designers, to be able to put together simple UIs using Tailwind CSS and CSS in general, so that you have white space and that the text is readable and legible, and that everything is mobile first and responsive. And that's what we're going to be covering in detail in that class. Then I'm going to be taking a break because I have to do client work and I have to hang out with my family and walk the dogs and do all of that stuff, do my exercising. And then at 7 p.m., I will be back, and then we'll be doing databases in CRUD, both SQL and MongoDB. If you're planning on doing any back-end development, or you just want to have an edge on the other front-end developers by knowing this stuff, it's certainly a class that you should check out. And then I'm ending the day at 8 p.m. We'll have the final class. It might go an hour, it might go 2 hours, because it's such a fun topic. We're going to be talking about Web3 and crypto with Introduction to Web3 and Crypto. I've been working in Web3 for about 1.5 years now, and I've been in crypto for quite a few years, and I've been on the ups and I've been on the downs. I've made money, I've lost money, I've thrown money away in Web3 and crypto and DeFi and everything else to get my education, so that I could then come back to you and help you do it without the pain and torture of losing the money. Real quick before we go to the Q&A, I just want to point out that we have a channel health. Webdevcourses.tv only exists because of you guys. I basically quit my full-time consulting jobs where I was making a lot of money so that I could teach you on the internet without any monetary, there's no monetary requirement here. It's not free. You're going to pay your tuition in other ways. You're going to pay your tuition by sharing the channel. You're going to pay your tuition by being early and keeping the chat moving, keeping the energy high. You're going to earn your tuition by giving tips if you can. The way that it's going to be set up is that this is a pay as you can education. So if you're just starting out, I started out homeless and broke as a teenager in the country that I wasn't supposed to be in. So I understand broke. And if you're broke, I do not want your money. But if you got into a place where you're buying Starbucks coffees and you're smoking weed or whatever, you're drinking alcohol, you're doing your vices, if you've gotten to that place, tipping $1 or $2 or $4 or 10 is not so much for me to ask for. I've done this for 25 years and now I'm giving it to you, no matter where you are in the world, as long as of course you can speak and understand a little bit of English. But we are changing that. We are going to be doing some translations into Spanish to start, and we're interested in finding help in India to get subtitles done in Hindi as well, and other languages as needed. Here's our channel health. Right now we're doing great. I mean, we're not capped off. We're not 100% health. But if you had this amount of health, you would feel comfortable walking around the game. You wouldn't necessarily go into a dungeon without replenishing it, but it's not a terrible thing, right? And the reason that the health is the way that it is because of wonderful people like Richard Soriano, Joshua V Stories, I Don't Know You, Julia Quina, and Ryan Bent. These are friends of the channel who have, you see that tip jar QR code? Those friends of the channel, those are our producers. They shot that QR code with their phone. That took them to our tip jar. The tip jar supports a small family-run business. This is Webdev Courses.tv. It's myself, Mark. I was born in Mexico. I was raised in the United States illegally. My wife, Monse, she's Mexican. We live in Mexico, and we've also employed our 2 teenage nephews to do content editing and some other things. So know that if you do decide to support this show with your hard-earned money, it's going to a small family business. It's not going to some big corporation. How's everybody doing? Would you guys like to do some Q&A? If there's nobody that has questions, then it's okay. You guys can talk about anything. I haven't set up Spotify playlists yet, and I'm not actually using Spotify here. Street K Leet over on Twitch. Thank you for joining us, of course. Mona Lisa Daddy. Hello, hello, hello. JD4 Codes. Mark, what's poppin'? Things are wonderful, man. Things are wonderful. This is really fun. I'm very happy to be here every day with a proper schedule, a proper curriculum, teaching in an organized, clean-cut fashion for my friends. As much as I love being crazy and doing all of that stuff, that's not my mission. My mission is to bring web development education to as many people as possible. All right, let's check out on YouTube. We got Chris. What's up, buddy? We got Subhash Prabhu, which is awesome because I haven't seen you before, so welcome. He says TypeScript is like throwing acid on JavaScript, and as a programmer who's very good at JavaScript, I don't disagree with that statement. I don't hate TypeScript because I don't hate tools and languages. It's stupid. They're just tools. TypeScript serves a very important role where it's used to constrain developers that don't know what they're doing. Personally, I don't like it all, but yeah. Welcome, Mayank. He is also a wonderful friend of the channel. CSS, the good parts, Chris Logan says, which is absolutely true. Let's see, Jeremiah Quill. The most important part of Tailwind, you can develop layout styles in your markup without changing files. This is so true. You'll see when we start doing some CSS, but really quickly, the CSS gets out of hand. The file gets really big, and then you have multiple files, and then you're not sure where to find stuff. With Tailwind, you can just, once again, you have like 6 different directives, right? 6 different styles, but they fit into 2 words with a hyphen or something that sits in your HTML, so that you don't have to open a file to see where to open a file to see, to open a file to dig through 1,000 lines to find the CSS. It's just right where you're at. It's super nice. Northern Chimp. He's late, but that's okay. We got Atulia. Welcome, welcome. We got Magic Eagle. That's amazing. That's amazing. And yes, I want to show you guys how to fish. I don't want to just buy you fish. I don't want to fish for you. I want to show you where the streams are. I want to show you what the times of days are and what the hooks are, what the baits are, what the techniques are. And then you guys can go off and do your own fishing. And then what I really want is for you to become fishers of men and women and non-binaries, fishers of humans. I want you to go out and I want you to fish more humans and bring them in so we can also teach them to fish. Would you mind sharing your Spotify playlist when you're listening back in the days? Some sort of anarchy rap. Okay, yeah, I can tell you that. I'll put it on a Discord for now. I have a Discord link. It should be in the description. If it's not, we'll put it in. Vento, first time chat. Welcome. He says, or they say, we will be fishing. That's amazing. I want to thank everybody. What time is it? I want to thank everybody who has joined us today for the first session of the first lesson of the first course of the first hour of the first day of Webdev courses.tv. You guys are all awesome. And I'm going to be back here at 10 a.m. We're going to be doing vanilla JavaScript. Let me get back over to the schedule. Vanilla JavaScript for beginners. So no React, no frameworks, no nothing, just good old JavaScript. So you can really understand, like, what is this thing? Why does it exist? Why would you even need something like React? You wouldn't know until you've actually suffered through some JavaScript. So we're going to be doing that together. Jeremiah Quill says, Mark, your tips on React state and how you think about UI has really helped me refactor my color game. Oh, Jeremiah, could you please give us a link to your color game so I can paste it over to Twitch, because it's awesome. Okay, so also the students that are watching this, they build things because they go to the Discord. Again, we'll get the link in the description. They go to the Discord and they talk to me there and they say, Mark, what can I build? And I tell them, which is definitely different than what you're gonna try to build clones of garbage. Don't do that. Just don't make garbage. Come to Uncle Mark, I'll tell you what to build. Or you can go to a guy like Jeremiah Quill, because this dude didn't ask me what he should build. He just started building these amazing color tools that you'd have to see him to here it is. Here's a color game, and he's got some rainbow text tools and some other stuff. I'm just going to put the link right here. This is from Jeremiah. I love that name, Quill. So that's who built that cool little tool. Check it out. That's some stuff you can do in React. Honestly, after a couple of weeks of taking, well, we really don't have React on here yet, so to speak, but eventually Introduction to Modern Web Development will become Modern Web Development, and then we're going to be working on React, and then you'll be able to build awesome shit like that. Uncle Mark will point you right, Chris Logan says, and here's the thing, I will always try to point you right, and if I can help you in any way on your web development journey, on your programmer journey, please let me know either in the chat and Twitch or on YouTube, or jump into the Discord and let me know there, because I want nothing more than to help you on your journey so that you can help others on that journey, so that they can help others on that journey, and we can make a sweet little beautiful place of humanity and a sea of craziness. I'll be back on the next hour. Love you guys. See you soon.